What is a weblog?
A weblog is a web page, but it's a web page where the entries are usually short.
I like to say they're the size of an idea.
And they're in chronological order. Some people do call me the blog father because a lot of readers who read my weblog were inspired to go out and start their own.
My site's not easy to categorize because you could go there on any particular day and I could either be talking about the Democrats or J-Lo. Like Kryptonite the Stupid is basically my way of saying that much like how green kryptonite kills Superman, I'm hoping that my writing will kill the stupid in the world, but it's a never-ending battle because there's a never-ending supply of stupid.
It is a place where you put up your thoughts for others to read as they happen.
Some of the very best weblogs are on one topic, and you wonder how someone could fixate on it, and at the same time, you're glad that they do.
There are blogs about the war, there are blogs against the war, there are blogs about science, there are blogs about medicine.
Look, I saw something neat, go look.
There are blogs about cats.
An essay on what you did with your dog all day.
Teenage boys and girls writing about whatever interests them, which is usually not interesting to anybody else but them.
It is a place where you record a little slice of your brain for the public to consume in real time.
Wall Street traders clearly think that a Republican Senate is going to be good news for them. Why? Maybe they think Republicans will go easier on corporate thieves. Maybe they think Republicans are more likely to invade Iraq, subdue the Middle East, and begin shipping booty, women, and slaves back for the kings of Wall Street to feast on. I don't really know what it is they prefer about a Republican Senate. They probably don't know themselves.
The kind of person that likes to have a weblog is the kind of person that likes to mouth off a lot.
I'm an academic, and the old joke is that to be an academic, the secret to success is to never have a private thought.
I've always loved to be the one pointing out the elephant in the room that everybody's kind of ignoring.
There's always been a cottage industry in trading your ideas with your friends and making your relatives listen to them over Thanksgiving dinner.
I got started blogging just because I was bored at work, and I like to hear myself think, and I like other people to hear what I'm thinking because I like it to feed my ego.
So the idea that I can have an idea about something and people can be reading about it now.
To be able to rant for hours at a time on their favorite topic.
I think that it's the same thing that makes somebody either a bore or the life of the party, or both.
Look, I don't know how much this would stop, Sniper Idiot, but if firearms fingerprinting could make it easier to catch one murderer, shouldn't it be done? Our president says no. Guess the NRA wasn't fooling when they said, if we win, we'll have a president where we work out of their office.
What's happening between journalism and blogs is equivalent to going from a sort of very primitive brain to a very advanced processing brain.
You have an instant feedback loop with the people that are reading what you're writing. Traditional newspaper journalism, you'll write something and basically send it out into a void. And you'll get some response, but little of anything. I can write something on my weblog, and as soon as I've posted it, I've got 3 responses telling me what they think about it, if they disagree with it, and then it helps you refine your conversation because you end up with a dialogue, and it's almost like a chat room.
A newspaper column is a lecture, and the web is a conversation. Often I'll post something, I'll get comments from people who tell me, you're totally wrong about this. Sometimes I'll say, they're right, I am wrong about this. I'll change what I said. I'll put an update that says, I'm wrong.
There's a saying in the weblog world that we'll fact check your ass, which basically means that your readers have the entire web at their fingertips. And if you make a mistake or if you pull a wrong quote from somebody, they'll search and they'll find it in 10 seconds and post it right back to you. and then you've got to slink back in your hole and explain why you made this thing up or why you missed it in the first place.
If you put up something that's wrong, the social norm in the blogosphere is that if someone points it out, you put it up in exactly the same amount of space as where you put the thing that was wrong in the first place.
That's really not something you get in a newspaper. A newspaper messes up and it's a correction all the way at the back of section F.
Weblogs are journalism in the most classic sense. That is, a weblog really is a journal.
I think it is a lot like the way newspapers started out, which were just people publishing a pamphlet and selling it on the street or selling it at a bookseller's. That's how Jonathan Swift used to write his works. And that eventually those separated into the newspaper and the book industry. But in the very early days, it was just people who had something to say.
Weblogs can be journalism, but it depends on who's doing the weblogging.
I don't think of myself as a journalist. I write paying pieces, and then I guess I am a journalist for as long as someone's printing it.
In a modern frame of reference, we tend to think of journalism as sort of splitting between reporting on the one hand and kind of punditry or analysis on the other. And weblogging is mostly analysis and punditry. We get some first-hand reporting. There was actually a lot of first-hand reporting by bloggers from Lower Manhattan on September 11th. But in general, it's mostly opinion and analysis and criticism rather than first-hand reporting of news. But that's part of journalism.
I don't consider myself a journalist in any way, shape, or form.
There's an artificial hierarchy where people want to have graduated from weblogs to being a real writer, where as soon as something's really good, then they'll take it off their weblog and try and pitch it to a magazine or something. And I don't buy it. The only difference is that I'm getting paid, a couple $100 for a couple hundred words, and it's not really worth that much. My bigger goal is to get my idea out there, and I've already succeeded with that.
The website Dialogue Now has a discussion of an idea I've long favored, the reunification of India and Pakistan. I refuse to believe that British interference and the opportunism of some short-sighted, spiteful natives of each of these countries will doom all of their citizens to endless cycles of violence. I've always been fiercely proud of my heritage and of my family, but there's blood on our hands. We need new leaders to remind Indians, Pakistanis, and Kashmiris that they're nothing but one bickering, beautiful, obnoxious, and brilliant people.
When you know a lot about a subject, it's always irritating to read sort of generic media treatments of the subject where they get things wrong.
The New York Times had a story on how many people turned out for a protest against the war in Iraq, and weblogs were able to correct the Times or show the Times biases in their reportage.
I think it's tremendously motivating to anyone who knows anything about a subject to speak out about it when they see it done wrongly in the media. And the media gets a lot wrong, not because they mean badly, but because they're journalists. They majored in communications. They're not people who wanted to spend 2 years studying statistical methodology so they could really learn how to do a social science survey.
I think there's a tradition in classical journalism when it gets lazy to present an issue as binary.
They like to have left and right and not middle, or slightly off center, or way left or way right. And they sort of like to keep things as, Coke and Diet Coke, when in reality you have Shasta.
And I think that weblogs address a lot of the nuance where you can say, well, I'm kind of against it, but let me hear about the other side.
I think weblogs are definitely taking columnists down a peg, and I think rightly so. I mean, anybody who writes a column knows that it does not, in fact, descend from Olympus on marble slabs, that, in fact, it's something that you sit and puzzle over and maybe change your mind about, and then send it off and say, I hope I was right about that, no matter how confident it sounds. I think that now everybody sort of realizes that. And you see mainstream columnists responding to weblog posts, which I think is the surest evidence that it's having an effect on how they view themselves.
When will we get back to normal? A colleague asked me that today. This is normal, I replied. For most of human history, wondering when someone from another tribe was going to try to kill you was the national pastime. In much of the world, it still is. It's only in comparatively strong and wealthy Western nations that we can pretend that safety is normal. It really isn't normal for us either. We've had Pearl Harbor, the Civil War, and the War of 1812, in which most of Washington, D.C. was burned to the ground. Normal is what we call those brief periods when something normal isn't happening.
Some people are afraid that, the big media companies are going to take over blogging, but I think there's room enough for Microsoft, NBC, and me.
It's going to happen. I mean, big media is going to try to occupy this space because it competes with them. On some level, a hit for Instapundit means fewer people who use MSNBC as their primary news gathering source.
It'd be foolish for them not to adopt this format, not to use a tool this powerful that people connect with this much on an emotional, visceral level as a tool for telling stories that journalists do.
When big media create their own in-house weblogs, I think the result is likely to be like what happened in the 60s and 70s when the Soviet Union decided that rock and roll music from the West was a threat, so they created communist rock and roll bands. They had all the accoutrements, they had electric guitars, they had amplifiers, they wore blue jeans, but somehow it just wasn't the same. There's no reason why a big media weblog couldn't be every bit as good, except for one thing, and that is they have to give the weblogger total editorial freedom. And not many big corporate media enterprises are willing to do that.
Because these are open to the world, because they are neutral by being in cyberspace or on the internet as opposed to being in a physical location, it lets people engage with one another in a way that they couldn't with the barriers of the physical world.
Everybody's always liked to quote A.J. Liebling and say freedom of the press belongs to the man that owns one. And that has traditionally been used as a way of saying freedom of the press isn't all it's cracked up to be. But it's now become the actual fact because, in essence, everyone can own a printing press, whether they're Air Force mechanics or truck drivers or Australian journalists we probably wouldn't have heard of before. They can become quite well known, and if their views are interesting and catch an audience, they can have as big an audience of devoted readers as an awful lot of newspaper columnists.